8 days later, and on the day of Roland's funeral, 23-year-old Marine Richard Allen Keith, hitchhiking on his way back to Camp Pendleton from seeing his girlfriend in the city of Carson, is abducted, plied with drugs, bound, and strangled. An off-duty fireman finds his body in southern Orange County. Kraft's scorecard reads only Marine Carson. 3 weeks later, Washington native 23-year-old hitchhiker Keith Arthur Kleinbiel ingests large amounts of acetaminophen and alcohol. A motorist finds him sprawled across the I-5 in Mission Viejo. Paramedics arrive at 3:30 a.m. to find Keith still alive, but he dies shortly after in hospital. 2 months later, 20-year-old Richard Anthony Crosby is found discarded north of Highway 71 in San Bernardino. He was hitchhiking home after seeing a movie. Then 21-year-old Long Beach truck driver Michael Joseph Inderbeaten is murdered and left on the ramp of the I-605. Kraft takes another break from killing until June 1979, when 20-year-old Marine Donnie Harold Crystal is taken, bound, tortured, and thrown from a moving vehicle onto the 405 highway. He dies from an overdose of drugs and alcohol. Multiple witnesses see his body being pushed from a car, but they can't agree on its identification. 2 months after that, 21-year-old English tourist Keith Anthony Jackson is found discarded in 2 trash bags and a cardboard box behind a gas station. Only his head, torso, and left leg are ever found. Kraft's scorecard reads only England. 2 weeks after that, 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolie is found in Lake Arrowhead. His legs and head severed after death. His possessions would later be found in Kraft's home. Then in November 1979, 15-year-old Jeffrey Sayer is waiting at a bus stop in Westminster when he's abducted and murdered by Kraft. 3 months later, 19-year-old Marine Mark Allen Marsh is found near the Templin Highway. He was decapitated after being picked up hitchhiking. At this time, throughout Southern California, gay bars start to post warnings to their customers along with photos of John Doe victims. Who would have suspected that the meek-looking Randy Kraft sitting right next to them at the bar was the culprit? Things are generally going well for Kraft at this point. Not only is he literally getting away with murder, but his work life is on the rise. His employers describe him as a self-starter, an excellent problem solver, and an exceptional employee. Friends of he and his partner remark how both men keep bizarre hours, with Seelig running a bakery and Kraft going up for his late-night drives. The couple start counseling to help with their issues. The therapist describes Seelig as defensive and anxious, with an insatiable sex drive. Kraft makes enough through work to buy a house in Long Beach and moves in with Jeff Seelig. The men like to travel. They go to Mexico, Lake Tahoe, New York City, Key West, and even plan a European vacation, though neither can find the time to get away. It's the summer of 1980, and Kraft travels to Oregon for a business trip, staying in a town close to Portland. While he's there, murders plague the state. 17-year-old Michael Sean O'Fallon, a native of Denver with hopes of seeing the world before starting college in the fall, is hitchhiking across the U.S. and Canada when he gets into a killer's car. He's found along the I-5, hog-tied with near-fatal levels of alcohol and Valium in his blood, having died of strangulation. Kraft's scorecard lists him as Portland, Denver. 17-year-old hitchhiker Michael Dwayne Cluck gets into Kraft's car in Oregon trying to get to California. He's left along the I-5 after being kicked and beaten to death. On the same day the body is found, Kraft visits the hospital for treatment of an injured foot he says he hurt while walking barefoot in his hotel room. Back in California, children play near the El Toro Marine Air Base, where they find the corpse of 19-year-old Marine Robert Wyatt Loggins Jr. discarded in a trash bag. High levels of alcohol and antihistamines are found in his blood, and police would later find photographs of Robert sitting on Kraft's couch in various nude and pornographic poses. Kraft is traveling now a lot for work between California, Oregon, Michigan, and where he goes, murder follows. 17-year-old sex worker Christopher Allen Williams is found in the San Bernardino Mountains with sedatives in his system. In Echo Park, residents complain of a foul smell coming from the Hollywood freeway. And in July 1982, a Caltrans employee finds the decomposing body of a 14-year-old named Raymond David. He's discarded along a Rampart Boulevard off-ramp. Raymond was looking for his lost dog when he was approached by Kraft, who marks the murder on his scorecard as dog. Then, 40 feet away from where they find Raven's body, the same workers find 16-year-old Robert Avila, who had been reported missing. 4 months later, 24-year-old Arne Mikael Lane is abducted while hitchhiking to Orange County, looking for work, and he's murdered. Then 26-year-old Brian Witcher's semi-nude body is found having been thrown from a moving car along the I-5 in Oregon. Autopsy reveals high levels of alcohol and Valium in his system. Kraft then flies to Grand Rapids, Michigan for work, and while he's staying at the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel, he meets a pair of cousins at the hotel bar, Dennis Alt and Chris Schoenborn. The two are later found murdered, doped with alcohol and Valium, but by the time the bodies are found, Kraft is back in Oregon, where a motorist finds 19-year-old Lance Trenton Taggs, recently come over from Hawaii, dead along the I-5. In December of 1982, 29-year-old carpenter Anthony Jose Silveira goes missing while hitchhiking in Oregon. Kraft is in the state on business and he drives from Portland to Seattle to visit some friends. During the visit, the friends notice he's wearing a military jacket with the name Silveira embroidered on it. He's taken a trophy from his victim and he's flaunting it in public. Oregon police notice a pattern of the killings. The bodies are always discarded near mass transportation routes, and they theorize the killer is from another state and only murdered when they're in town on business. So they contact their counterparts in Southern California, where other victims have met a similar fate. In order to narrow down the list of suspects, the Oregon police compiled a list of names of people that frequently travel between the two states. Kraft's name appears 18 times on the list. In January 1983, 21-year-old hitchhiker Eric Church is last seen heading from Orange County to Sacramento. He's found along the I-605 with obvious signs of struggle against his restraints. Semen on his body would later match to Kraft. Two young men leave their friend's place in February, just after midnight, going to get something to eat. Instead, they get into Kraft's car. 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson is found alongside an off-ramp close to the Garden Grove Freeway, and 20-year-old Roger Duvall is found the next day. Discarded down a mountainside in San Bernardino County, both had ingested alcohol and propranolol. What happens next? We have to ask, did Kraft get sloppy? Was he overconfident? Did he want to get caught? Because on May 14th, 1983, at 1:10 a.m., a Toyota Celica weaves back and forth down the I-5 in Mission Viejo. Police on duty notice the car driving erratically. They start their sirens and they follow closely behind. The Toyota slows down and the driver's side door slowly opens. A man exits the car holding a beer bottle and he dumps the contents into the road. It's clear to the officers that the man is drunk and they notice the front of his pants are undone. Officers perform a field sobriety test, which the driver fails miserably, and Randy Kraft is arrested for driving under the influence. But it doesn't end there. The second police officer approaches the Toyota and notices a young man in the passenger seat. He's slumped over, his eyes are closed, and his jacket is thrown over him. There are Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets strewn about. The officer tries to rouse the man. He shakes his arm to wake him up and feels the cold skin. Alarmed, the police officer looks for a pulse, but 25-year-old Marine Terry Lee Gambrell is dead, with ligature marks around his neck and his jeans unbuttoned. Kraft is immediately charged with driving under the influence of alcohol and taken into custody while detectives thoroughly search the Toyota. In the backseat, they find a belt, perfectly matching the bruising around Terry's neck. There's beer, tranquilizers, various prescription drugs and stimulants. There are bloodstains everywhere, which turn out to be human. Beneath the carpet is 50 photographs of young men in pornographic poses. All of them appear to be asleep or dead. And then, inside the trunk, they find a ring binder with a handwritten list of 61 coded notations. All of this leads investigators to Kraft's home, where they find clothes and personal possessions of young men who have been murdered over the previous decade. But let's examine the scorecard, that ring binder containing the neatly printed terms and phrases, 30 on the left side, 31 on the right. They're Kraft's victims. Each entry refers to a murder or double murder. Some entries are initials, such as EDM, Edward Daniel Moore. Others refer to the torture or mutilation the victims endured, like Marine Head BP. Speaking of Mark March, a Marine found decapitated heading to Buena Park. And yet another entry refers to a place where the body was left, like the Golden Sail, referring to Craig Unitas, who was found at the Golden Sails Hotel. Portland, Hawaii is Lance Taggs. Marine Carson is Richard Keith. New Year's Eve is Mark Hall. There are also a minimum of 4 double murders, GR2, meaning Grand Rapids 2, 2-in-1 Beach, 2-in-1 Hitch, and 2-in-1 MV to PL. All in all, the scorecard shows the possibility of up to 67 victims in total. On May 16, 1983, Kraft is formally charged with the murder of Terry Lee Gambrill, and after investigators speak to over 700 witnesses and gather over 250 physical exhibits, Kraft is formally charged with 16 more murders. On September 8, 1983, Orange County Sheriff Brad Gates holds a press conference to say his men have, quote, been able to establish Randy Kraft's propensity, without a doubt, for sexually deviant behavior that goes back to the 1970 period, end quote. 8 more murder charges are filed against Kraft, 6 in Oregon and 2 in Michigan, but none ever go to trial. Of course, he avoids answering police questions and insists that the scorecard simply refers to his old lovers who are all alive and doing well. Police, however, know better. He was found with a dead body in his car, snapshots of dead men, fingerprints cover the crime scene, and they have a list that links the murders to him, making Kraft a prolific trophy hunter. When the trial begins on September 26, 1988, the judge bars cameras from being in the courtroom, but he allows spectators. There are almost 160 witnesses called to testify and over 1,000 exhibits introduced into evidence. These include things like bloodstains, hair and finer evidence, fingerprints, negatives and photographs of victims, items of clothing, prescription drugs, a buck knife found in the car, work and travel records, gas receipts that put him in a particular location where victims had been abducted, and personal possessions of some victims he had kept. With such a huge mountain of evidence, the defense tries to make alibis for where Kraft was during each murder, throwing out suggestions of alternate suspects. They try to make him out to be an articulate, hard-working, and upstanding member of the community. The victims, they argue, were victims of someone else. The defense goes on to point that the investigators initially thought that the murders were committed by one or both of the other freeway killers, namely William Bowman or Patrick Kearney. The trial lasts for 13 months and ends up being the most expensive in Orange County history. Closing arguments last for 3 days, with the prosecution calling Kraft, quote, a true scorecard killer, and the jury deliberates for 11 days. Finally, on May 12, 1989, the jury comes back with a verdict of guilty of 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. Now that he's been found guilty, it was time to sort out the penalty for his offenses. So in June 1989, the same jury reconvenes to hear more testimony from the prosecution and defense in regards to the looming penalty. The prosecution introduces evidence of Kraft's murders in Michigan and Oregon, while the defense dismisses it as highly speculative. And they introduce testimony of a PET scan of Kraft's brain supposedly showing abnormalities in his frontal lobes, which they say affect his emotions and impulse. The prosecution are quick to respond and say, quote, there is nothing wrong with Mr. Kraft's mind other than he likes killing for sexual satisfaction. But much to Kraft's dismay, on August 11, 1989, the jury returns with a penalty of death. This is the longest running and most expensive trial in Orange County to date, but the appeals would drag on even longer. For over 13 years, Kraft has been trying to dodge the death penalty. His first appeal claims the gas chamber violates his First Amendment religious tenet by forcing a condemned inmate to, quote, actively participate in his own killing, end quote. But that appeal, of course, is rejected. Here's another interesting twist to the story. DNA evidence from some of Kraft's murders indicate that there was more than one killer involved. For example, moving a 200-pound corpse wouldn't be easy in any situation, but especially throwing them from a moving vehicle that's going 50 miles an hour without compromising the driving is nearly impossible. If you remember, there were also 2 sets of footprints in the sand dragging the body of John Milares on Sunset Beach. Moreover, semen samples are found in one victim that are inconsistent with Kraft's blood type. and the photographs of the victims, which could not have been developed at a commercial store due to the nature of the pictures, had to have been developed somewhere. But Kraft has no darkroom experience or darkroom equipment. So who could this accomplice be? One theory from the prosecution is Kraft's former lover, Jeff Graves. They lived together between 1971 and 1976 when 16 of the known murders were committed. But before police have a chance to question him about the involvement, Jeff Graves dies of AIDS in July 1987. Another potential accomplice is a man named Bob Jackson. In January 2000, Jackson, a small-time criminal, is interviewed by a journalist named Dennis McDougal, who had written a book in 1991 about Kraft called Angel of Darkness. McDougal interviews Jackson, who confesses to murdering 2 hitchhikers with Kraft. Both murders are uncorroborated by local authorities. However, Jackson also tells McDougal that Kraft's scorecard only lists the most memorable murders and that the body count is closer to 100. Police interview Jackson and persuade him to go to a mental institute, and they don't file any murder charges as there's no concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. Speaking of the book, Angel of Darkness, Kraft actually sues McDougal for writing the book, saying it smeared his, quote, good name, portraying him as a, quote, sick and twisted man, and destroyed his prospects for future employment, ruining his chances for appeal. He's looking for $62 million in damages. Of course, the lawsuit is dismissed by the California Supreme Court. Now, here's a creepy side note. Guess who Randy Kraft befriends while in prison on death row? William Bonin. Randy Kraft gets to know William Bonin while he's on death row. What do 2 men like that talk about, I wonder? As of 2024, Kraft remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He continues to deny responsibility for any of the homicides he was either convicted of or suspected of committing, as if anybody believes him. And so ends the horrifying reign of terror of serial killer Randy Kraft. So I think it's safe to say, it's pretty clear to us that he obviously did have help. And it's shocking that they weren't able to find enough evidence, DNA, to actually capture somebody. It's impossible, the sheer number of murders, and then, as they stated, the car driving 50 miles an hour, pushing bodies out of cars, 200-pound people moving corpses around. I mean, that kind of carnage is not something that you can do by yourself. And so this is obviously the footprints, the semen samples. It's unfortunate, and now obviously too much time has passed. Nothing's going to happen. Obviously, they even had that one guy, Jackson, admit to some of the murders, and it still didn't stick because there wasn't enough evidence. So we can safely assume at this point that too much time has passed. We are not going to find the accomplices, which is, it's one thing for the crimes to happen and for the person to get caught and then pay the price, but then for people to commit heinous acts like that and not get caught, which I suppose happens all the time, is frustrating and disappointing. A big difference between Kraft and other killers, like, let's say, Jeffrey Dahmer from our last episode, where Jeffrey just completely owned up to everything. Yes, it was me. And there was a sort of an introspective, wondering, why am I evil? Was I born this way? Was I made this way? What made me do this? And there's a kind of like trying to figure out what had made him a monster. Whereas Kraft, to me, is even worse. It's another level because it's complete denial of it's just, I think I'm better than you. I think I'm smarter than you. Yeah, you caught me, but you can't really make it stick. And yeah, you found me guilty, but I'm not going to own up to it because, I got away with it for so long. And you think you won, but I'm not going to own up to what I did, which is, more evil. If there's a scale of evil. And then I wanted to talk about the boyfriends. How do you, which is another unique part of this story, because, usually, from the stories that I can remember and the episodes that I've done, I don't remember them dating very much. These were just single men who went to work, which also is like fascinating to me. The fact that you can hold down a job and do this on the side is just insane to me. Just the duplicity of like going to work and facing people and then going home and doing this is just what? But most of them are single, and most of them would go to work and then come home and do this. And then this guy actually was in relationships. Not only relationships, he lived with them. And it sounded like, oh, we would have problems, we go to counseling, like a normal relationship. So the question, I guess, is how much did his partners know? Were they involved? Can you live with someone for so many years under the same roof and not have some kind of idea of what's going on? Did they know? Were they in denial? Did they suspect it? Did they just think that he was cheating? Maybe cheating or going out and, finding sex and coming back. But, did they suspect? Who knows? Is it like a mob wife or something where you have an inkling, stuff is going on, it's probably not good, you don't want to know the details, or were they more involved?